Eleanor Spencer had lived in Mapleton for nearly her entire life. She had grown up in a little house with a bright yellow door, watched the old oak tree out front expand its canopy over the decades, and learned to value both the serenity and the occasional envy that came with a small town. Now, well into her 70s, Eleanor shuffled down the sidewalk toward the heart of downtown, her mind brimming with plans for a most unusual venture. She had always been known in Mapleton for her sweet tooth when she was a child. Nothing thrilled her more than receiving a stick of licorice or a chocolate bar from the local grocer after her successful completion of chores or the simple exercise of good manners. Over the years, her love of candy never waned. If anything, it grew more pronounced. While some might have worried about cavities or other consequences, Eleanor's fondness for confections came wrapped with so many comforting memories. It felt like a celebration of her life's journey. Recently, she had decided to open a candy workshop in one of the vacant buildings off Maple Street. The idea had struck her after she discovered boxes filled with decades-old recipes in her late sister's attic. Recipes for taffy and brittle, caramels and fudge, each annotated with scribbles about stirring times and flavor variants. Eleanor recalled making some of those recipes in her family kitchen as a teenager, laughing while attempting to swirl hot sugar in a pot or shape cocoa-based fudge on a marble countertop. The recollections warmed her heart. She felt that reviving these candies could be a delightful way to bring joy to others. But there was a deeper motivation as well. In that kitchen so long ago, she had shared moments of genuine connection with her family. If a pot of chocolate could bring warmth to a lonely heart, perhaps she could replicate that kind of camaraderie here and now. On the morning her shop finally opened, the pale light of sunrise fell across the wooden sign that read, in elegant lettering, Eleanor's Confectionery Workshop. She was careful not to make it look too fancy. Mapleton was a humble, tight-knit community, and she wanted the place to feel welcoming. Over a row of glass display jars, she set out small samples of chocolate-dipped almonds, chocolate truffles dusted with cocoa, and plump gumdrops shining in shades of green and red. For the first few days, only a handful of curious passers-by stepped inside. It was mid-October, and everyone in town was preparing for the annual fall festival. Children zipped about wrapped in scarves, delighted by the first chill in the air, while store owners stacked pumpkins and mulled cider. Some neighbors looked in on Eleanor out of curiosity rather than a love of sweets, but she happily invited any and all to sample her confections. She had the patience and generosity of a grandmother, offering second helpings of dessert at dinner. Nobody ever left her workshop without a smile on their face. The workshop included a spacious back room separated from the front by a swinging door. It was there that Eleanor planned to teach candy-making classes, offering a chance for anyone who joined to learn about measuring out sugar, heating it to the right temperature, and adding precisely the right amount of flavoring. She stuck flyers up around the neighborhood, advertising a short 4-week candy-making workshop every Saturday afternoon. To her delight, she received more than a dozen signups. When Saturday rolled around, a group of strangers gathered at the front of the store. They milled about, glancing at the jars of rock candy gleaming on the shelves. Eleanor poked her head out from the back room with a warm grin and ushered them inside. She had subdivided one long table into a few workstations, each with bowls, wooden spoons, measuring cups, and candy thermometers. All right now, she announced, a hint of excitement in her tone. It's wonderful to have you all here. I'm Eleanor Spencer, though you can just call me Ellie if you'd like. Today, we're going to learn how to make fudge, one of the fundamentals of confectionery. She paused, her bright eyes shining. More importantly, we're going to have fun. Her audience ranged widely in age. There was Janine, a timid young mother who'd brought her daughter, Nora, in hopes of sharing a mother-daughter project. Nora looked to be about 7, with her black curls tied up in pigtails. Next to them stood Marcus, a tall, middle-aged man whose broad shoulders gave him the presence of someone who might have been an athlete once. He admitted to Eleanor, in a self-conscious whisper, that he wanted to impress his wife by surprising her with homemade sweets on their upcoming anniversary. There was also Oliver, a teenager of perhaps 16. Sporting a t-shirt with a sci-fi design, he looked sullen at first, muttering he was only here because his mother had insisted he learn some real skills. At the other end of the table stood Harriet, A retired librarian who had known Eleanor for decades, and perched on a stool at the corner was Winston, a soft-spoken man in his 50s wearing thick-rimmed glasses. He had recently moved to Mapleton to care for an elderly aunt and seemed keen on making new connections. He gave a small wave and a polite hello. Eleanor instructed them patiently, passing out chocolate squares to chop, sugar to measure, and cream to warm. Her voice soothed any anxiety they felt about messing up. Candy making is an art, she said, stirring a pot on her own workstation. It requires patience, attention, and a willingness to embrace mistakes. Even if something gets scorched, we can learn from that and try again. Occasional laughter and conversation bubbled up among them. Janine helped Nora whisk the butter, guiding small hands in circular motions. Marcus cracked jokes about his lack of kitchen skills, which made Oliver crack a reluctant grin. Harriet recounted a story from her days at the library, involving a rowdy group of fifth graders who checked out romance novels simply to giggle at the covers. Winston, softly smiling, nodded along, absorbing each anecdote with genuine interest. When they poured the fudge mixture into pans and waited for it to set, Eleanor suggested they sample certain ingredients from her personal stash. A drizzle of caramel sauce here, a sprinkling of high-end cocoa there. Before anyone realized how much time had passed, the fudge had hardened in the fridge. Everyone cut their own pieces, sampling the sweet results of their teamwork. "This is so good," Janine exclaimed, her cheeks growing rosy. She handed a small piece to Nora, who bit it with an excited squeal. Uh, Marcus proudly packed his fudge in a box, no doubt already picturing the look on his wife's face. Harriet teased him, saying if he hadn't found a second calling in candy making, he could at least open a cafe. Even Oliver seemed to soften a bit. He admitted that it tasted way better than the store-bought fudge. Winston nodded in agreement, politely devouring a chunk of his own creation. Eleanor beamed. "I knew you'd all do splendidly. Same time next Saturday, don't forget. We'll be working on homemade caramel and the art of pulling taffy. Bring your curiosity, your sense of humor, and perhaps some extra containers. We'll have lots of treats to take home." That first workshop set the stage for what would become a close-knit group. And each Saturday after that brought the same group of participants to Eleanor's back room. And the more confections they made, the more comfortable they grew sharing bits of themselves with one another. Caramel Day arrived with swirling clouds of sugar and cream. Eleanor taught them how to read the candy thermometer, emphasizing the step where a few degrees made all the difference between silky smooth caramel and a sticky mess. As the group worked, Harriet spoke about her late husband, describing how he used to bring her roses on their anniversary. It wasn't a sad story, but rather an affectionate memory. Janine, moved by Harriet's recollection, expressed how she struggled to balance motherhood with her dream of finishing her college degree. Marcus asked Janine about her plans, and she revealed she hoped to become a school counselor one day. Oliver, who had previously kept quiet, started listening more intently to these grown-up conversations. Winston, though quieter than most, was a comforting presence, helping to carry ingredients over to the stove or to wipe up stray patches of caramel, occasionally offering a kind comment in his gentle voice. Throughout it all, Eleanor would weave a story or two of her own, typically referencing her childhood and how she learned to gauge whether sugar water had reached the soft ball or hard crack stage simply by drizzling a bit into cold water. Her old-fashioned approach delighted the group. They came to see that candy making was about so much more than sugar and flavoring. It was a tapestry of memories and love. By the time they finished making caramel apples, crisp orchard fresh fruit enveloped in a rich golden shell, each participant left with a deeper sense of connection. Some even lingered, chatting away as the autumn sun dipped below the horizon. Eleanor's workshop had started to feel like a second home, a place where common interests fueled genuine friendships. Word spread through Mapleton that something special was happening in the back room of Eleanor's confectionery workshop. The participants raved about her classes. Nora boasted to her elementary school friends that she knew how to swirl fudge, which led to more parents calling Eleanor for enrollment inquiries. But the workshop was not just about enrolling new people, it was about the ties forming among the current group. By the third and fourth lessons, They liked to call themselves Ellie's Candy Crew. One crisp Saturday, the group arrived to find a wide assortment of red, purple, and orange taffy ingredients waiting on the counters. Eleanor couldn't resist giggling at the expressions on their faces. Today, she said, we're conquering pulled taffy. And I do mean conquering because it takes strength, agility, and perseverance. The workshop burst into action. Marcus and Oliver paired up, quickly discovering how tricky it was to manage a slab of taffy that desperately wanted to stick to everything. Harriet and Winston teamed up, Harriet with her sleeves rolled up as she manipulated the candy, Winston giving suggestions on timing and pulling techniques. Janine and Nora tried their best as well, with Janine holding up globs of pink taffy while Nora giggled at the gooey tendrils. There was a delightful chaos in the workshop that day, people calling out for help, laughter ringing out every few minutes, and a general sense of camaraderie that made the room glow. Here, let me show you, said Eleanor, stepping in to demonstrate. She took a sticky wedge of pink taffy and began pulling it with expert flair, stretching it out like a shimmering ribbon. You want to incorporate air into the candy. That's what makes it fluffy rather than dense. Just keep folding it back on itself like so. Oliver, appearing almost mesmerized, mirrored her motions, focusing as if on a scientific experiment. This is actually pretty cool, he admitted. Marcus chuckled, patting him on the back. Harriet let out a little cheer when she and Winston managed to shape their green taffy into neat ropes. Before leaving that day, each pair had produced a rainbow of pastel-colored sweets, carefully bagged for distribution. The entire group marveled at the vibrant swirl of colors they'd made together. Their gatherings extended beyond candy making by the time the workshop session ended. Several of them started meeting during the week, dropping by to chat with Eleanor, sharing coffee in the front room as she set out samples of a new praline or brittle she was testing. Marcus asked Harriet for book recommendations for his children, and Harriet was delighted to recommend classic adventure stories. Janine confided in Winston about her test anxieties, and Winston offered gentle tips on mindfulness, gleaned from years of coping with stressful academic situations in his own line of work. Oliver found himself stumbling in one day after school in search of an ear to vent to about the expectations layered on him by his parent. Eleanor graciously offered her good-natured wisdom, not scolding him to be grateful for the attention, but acknowledging how overwhelming it can be to feel pressured. She insisted that a piece of peppermint bark might help soothe the spirit, and Oliver offered a sheepish smile, taking the treat from her outstretched hand. Meanwhile, Mapleton's fall festival approached. A suggestion emerged among the candy crew. Why not operate a booth demonstrating candy-making techniques for festival goers? They floated the idea to Eleanor, who lit up with enthusiasm. Organizing a demonstration booth would require a good deal of coordination, but they felt ready. After all, hadn't they just spent weeks learning the ins and outs of fudge, caramel, and taffy? They spent evenings in the workshop planning. Winston drew up a schedule of who would man the booth at various times. Harriet got in touch with her buddies at the library to see if they could lend folding tables or if they had spare tablecloths. Janine invited some of the mothers from Nora's school to help set up. Marcus promised to bring a portable stove, borrowed from his uncle, who occasionally did cooking demonstrations. Oliver quietly began designing a banner, showcasing candy swirls in bright colored pencils and neatly lettering Mapleton's sweetest spot. When the day of the fall festival arrived, Eleanor was among the first to arrive in the town square, carrying a tray of freshly made fudge and brownies. She wore a sunny apron dotted with images of candy canes, the same apron she had used decades ago when baking with her sister. The rest of the crew soon joined, setting up the booth with cheerful urgency. It was a perfect autumn day. Blue skies overhead, spiced scents of pine and cinnamon in the air, leaves swirling in vibrant oranges and reds underfoot. Before the festival officially opened, Janine took a moment, glancing around their booth. There were pots for melting sugar, containers of candy for sampling, even a little make-your-own caramel apple station for kids to try. Nora played the role of enticing passersby with sweet smiles and red candy apples. Harriet arranged the confections in neat lines. Marcus tested the stove to ensure it was hot enough. Oliver hung the banner, and Winston clipped a small price list into a frame. Eleanor watched them all with quiet pride. This was more than just a booth for her. She'd spent her early life in Mapleton feeling like this was a friendly town, but also yearning for something deeper. Now, in her later years, she had gathered a motley group of individuals who had discovered a genuine sense of friendship under her roof. It reminded her of the time her parents had thrown a block party decades ago, forging bonds that remained for years. In a sense, she was recapturing that magic now, maybe even expanding on it. As the festival came alive, crowds flocked to their station, drawn by the beckoning promise of free samples and the chance to see candy making up close. Harriet and Janine busied themselves with explaining the processes, while Marcus acted as the booth's grinning host, urging visitors to try the demonstration. Oliver stepped forward, somewhat timidly at first, to guide small children in stirring chocolate. He meticulously kept track of the steps, not wanting to ruin the recipe. Winston, meanwhile, quietly chatted with festival visitors, letting them know about Eleanor's weekly classes, enthralling them with stories of how everyone overcame their early fumbles in candy making. Occasionally, Eleanor would slide in behind the stove to give a quick demonstration, her practiced hands stirring molten sugar, as intense as any professional. And she shared tips gained from a lifetime of experiences, like the way humidity can derail even the best laid plans for making brittle, or how watching for small bubbles could indicate the sugar was nearing the perfect temperature stage. Parents, children, and even a few adventurous grandparents gazed at her in admiration. The whole booth pulsed with energy, the sweet sense of fudge and caramel enveloping them like a comforting blanket. By mid-afternoon, the booth had run out of multiple batches of candy, so the team hustled to prepare more. Oliver darted to the workshop with Harriet to fetch extra supplies. Janine and Marcus maintained order as an eager line of children waited to dunk apples in fresh caramel. Nora showed off her swirling technique to one wide-eyed boy, who then tried it himself under her watchful instructions. Noticing the activity in full swing, Eleanor took a moment to step away. She ventured to a bench a short distance from the booth, letting her weary feet rest. The crisp air brushed her cheeks, and she observed her friends in action, feeling something in her chest bloom that was more satisfying than even the sweetest candy. This was what she had hoped for, a circle of companionship in the heart of Mapleton, each person bringing their distinct personality, each person finding a sense of belonging through the shared, sometimes whimsical, craft of candy making. She recalled, in that reflective moment, her younger self, so many dreams, so many ideas. She had yearned for close-knit friendships, the kind where people truly looked after each other, shared heartaches and triumphs, laughed together until their sides hurt. The workshop, in all its sweet chaos, had become a place where that warmth naturally flourished. She couldn't help but smile at how that intangible goal had become a bright reality. Eventually, Winston spotted her on the bench and approached, a gentle concern on his face. "You all right?" he asked. "It's been a busy day." "Just needing a breath," Eleanor said, breathing in the cool autumn air. "It's a lot, but it's also so wonderful." She looked up at him. "I want to thank you, Winston. All of you. You don't know what it means to me, seeing you all come together like this." He gave a small nod, tilting his head. "I think we all feel lucky to be part of this. I know I do." An affectionate softness settled in his eyes. He didn't elaborate, but Eleanor understood that Winston, just like the others, had found a new home, a new sense of comfort in the workshop. They rejoined the group for the festival's final hours. A hush fell over the town square when other events concluded, and more than a few visitors drifted to their booth, praising their demonstrations or politely requesting a last-minute taste of taffy. The day wound down amid high spirits. At the end, the candy crew packed up their materials, said warm farewells to the passing festival goers, and teased each other about who had better stirring technique. Oliver proudly boasted of how he'd kept the chocolate from seizing up, which earned him a friendly pat on the back from Marcus. Janine lifted Nora into her arms, praising the girl for being a natural candy chef. Harriet noticed Winston rubbing his left shoulder. Apparently, pulling taffy all day took its toll, so she recommended he take a hot bath at home. Eleanor stood at the sidelines, tucking stray bits of candy wrappers in a trash bag, relishing the sight. They had come together as strangers, now they were friends. The festival's success had shown not only Mapleton, but also each of them how extraordinary a community can be when hearts are open and hands are ready to help each other. In the weeks that followed, that kinship only grew. Harriet started a book club that met once a month in the front of the workshop. The sweet smell of candy infusion, a welcome background note. Marcus and his wife joined Janine for a dinner to celebrate Janine's new job prospects, where they all ended up discussing comedic. Oliver found a small group of new pals at school, fundamentally spurred by his stories about learning to make candy, which was unexpectedly cool to a few classmates. Winston invited everyone over for a small potluck at the home he shared with his aunt, who was delighted to meet people from the neighborhood, and bragged about Winston's candy accomplishments to anyone who would listen. And Eleanor? She often paused in her daily chores to reflect on how an ordinary building, once an empty, dusty store space, had become a hub of laughter and personal confessions, recipes, and friendship. She continued to host the workshops for newcomers, repeating the process of teaching them how to carefully measure sugar and patiently wait for that critical temperature. But she always took time to remember the original Candy crew. They stopped by frequently with quick stories about their day, pushes of encouragement, or sometimes just a companionable silence in which they exchanged contented grins over a fresh fudge sample. It surprised no one when Harriet proposed, "Let's keep this group going beyond the workshop. We can have monthly get togethers, or maybe even field trips to candy expos." While they laughed about how much more candy they could possibly want, everyone realized it was really an excuse to remain close, to sustain the bonds they had built. Eleanor, always quick to encourage new ideas, promised the workshop doors would remain open to the group anytime they wanted to experiment with a new recipe. After all, she often said with a bright-eyed smile, candy is a reflection of life, sweet with the occasional lumps, but always made better when you share it with friends. Sure enough, the workshop took on a life of its own, continuing to forge connections among neighbors, passers-by, and travelers who heard about Mapleton's unique place where sugar and fellowship mingled so seamlessly. The older woman with the sweet tooth had sparked more than luscious fudge and silky caramel. She had created the perfect setting for hearts to converge, forging bonds as rich and enduring as any candy recipe, tucked away in the pages of family history. Though each of their journeys took different paths, Janine stepping closer toward her wistful dream of finishing college, Oliver figuring out his next steps after high school, Winston finding solace and purpose while caring for his Aunt Harriet, planning new library events, and Marcus reveling in the happiness of surprising his wife with homemade sweets. One thing united them all: their gratitude for the place where they had first truly bonded. That workshop, filled with the aroma of melting chocolate and swirling sugar, held a timeless kind of affection. Whenever life threw them curveballs or their days felt humdrum, they knew that stepping into the back room of Eleanor's confectionery workshop meant they would find warmth, belonging, and the sweet companionship they'd come to cherish. And in the gentle hush of evening, as Eleanor closed up shop, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind her, she carried away the comforting certainty that, no matter your age or standing, it's never too late to create something that brings people together. Sometimes that something is a piece of handcrafted candy. Other times, it's the intangible sense of community woven through stirring spoons and gentle laughter. Ultimately, it was both for her, and she knew, even in her twilight years, that the sweetness of life shone brightest when shared among friends. The Candy Workshop had become more than a business. It lived in the hearts of those who had found joy and friendship within its walls.